Hello and welcome to RIVE, Reflections in Veterinary Education. I'm going to hand it over to Eric, who's going to introduce our guest for this show.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. Really excited about this. I feel, we've had some really good guests on this show. This is the first that for me, which is like a little bit of celebrity kind of interview. Just because I feel like I've known of Regina for a long time. So would like to welcome Dr. Regina Schoenfeld-Tacher to the podcast. And to start off with, why don't you tell us just about your professional progression, like kind of how you got to where you are?
Sure. So, Eric, going back to that, yes, I've known of you since way back when I was at Colorado State University in the very early 2000s. You and I collaborated on some research with Lori Kogan.
That's right. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So we've heard of each other and we've coexisted for way over 20 years now.
Yeah.
So yeah, by way of background, I, like Jackie Pelzer, kind of came into veterinary medicine in a very non-traditional way. So my background is in chemical education. That's what my doctorate is in. And along the way, I got master's degrees in science education and educational technology. And at one point in time, I thought I wanted to be a high school chemistry teacher. That didn't really work out as well as I had hoped. And at that point, I decided that I really liked chemistry and I liked education, but I wanted a better environment, someplace where I could make more of a change. And I found out that there were 5 chemical education PhD programs in the country. And amazingly enough, I interviewed at the 5, and the one I really liked, which is where my path crossed with Catherine, happened to be at UNC, University of Northern Colorado in Greeley. So off I went to Greeley, and I really thought I was going to do something as a faculty member in science. My program was really good at preparing us to be faculty members, to teach, to conduct research, to write grants, to do all of this within the arena of chemistry. We were housed in a chemistry department. I was much more passionate about informal science education at the time. I really wanted to go to the Museum of Science and get people excited about this kind of work. So one fateful day, I was walking to a class over in the education building with a classmate, and I saw a notice posted on a board. For Colorado State University, they wanted a part-time person to facilitate technology integration and faculty evaluations of teaching. I said, gee, that sounds really fun. It's at a vet school. And then I turned to my friend Christy at the time. I was like, I'd love that job, but I just signed my TA contract for chemistry. She's like, so what? And I looked at her, she's like, I dare you to apply for the job.
I love it. Everybody needs a friend like that.
Yeah. I was like, no, I can't. She has a great growth mindset. And to this day, she's been one of my biggest inspirations. She actually went on to become chair of a chemistry department at a community college and ended up overseeing mortuary science among her portfolio of programs.
I love it.
So, yes, at that point, she double dog dared me and I applied. I had to. And I went to Colorado State University, having never owned a pet, interviewed at the vet school, and was just like, wow, this is a cool group of people. I like this. And the 6-month half-time job turned into, hey, do you want to be 3/4 time next year? Sure, why not? Oh, hey, we're moving this position to hard funding because we really like what you're doing and you've gotten our faculty to publish in veterinary education.
Wow.
You want to be permanent? Sure, why not? And this was a staff position. I was hired as coordinator of instructional design. And after a while, I was like, I have a PhD and I'm doing all the things you expect of faculty. So well, maybe we should make you a special appointment, a special faculty position, non-tenure track. Okay, sure. And thus began my career, which was really fun. So,
that's a great story. I don't think I've ever heard that story. That was
yeah, it's just amazing how we've all crossed paths in some way at some prior point in life. But yeah, to me, it was a story about being in the right place at the right time.
And being willing to walk through the door that opens for you.
Yes.
Or get pushed through if it's
pushed through. Yeah.
I mean, I was double dog dared. I couldn't turn that down.
That.
Yeah.
You know what I find I love, and I saw Eric had a similar response, is that we're like, never had a pet. And I'm like, that is so unusual for so many people who I think get into any part of vet med. It's like, well, I just have this. And I love that you're like, no, it was about the education. That's the path that you can't, you took it.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, well, it turns out these people are also pretty cool. And, but it was through that lens, which I think is, we don't hear that story very much. It's usually like, well, this blended my love of animals and this and that. And not that, you maybe you've developed a love of animals or you even had one before, but that wasn't the impetus. I think that's really cool, actually, that you're like, no, my passion is education.
Absolutely.
And
The
that,
veterinary part proved to be a bonus.
Yeah.
And about 6 months after I took the job, I acquired my first cat. It was
Ah.
rather embarrassing to be the only person in a classroom who did not own a pet. And
Tamed into it.
yes, and that has since snowballed into 5 cats.
there you go.
Yes, and a much deeper understanding of feline medicine than I ever thought possible.
Oh, I love that. That's wonderful. So I'm just because I think a lot of people listening will know you from, maybe at least one of your current positions. Can you tell us a little bit more about that's how you got your start, but
Sure.
what happened after that?
So I got my start at Colorado State and things were going very well, but there comes a point in time when after doing the same thing for so many years, it's no longer challenging or engaging. It becomes a little too routine. And at that point in time, I had worked on the clinical reasoning committee at CSU and I had some interest in that area. And Dr. Paul Lunn, who was my department chair in Colorado, was moving to accept the position as dean at North Carolina State. And we started talking during one of my annual reviews about opportunities for future growth and what I might do. And I really wanted the challenge of a tenure track position. And he was really looking for somebody to do what I did in North Carolina. So it became a question of, he's like, so if we were to have a position of this type in North Carolina, would you move? I was like, sure. Would you have a position? So it turned out that the position opened and we did have a national search, actually international. I knew both of my competitors at the time. It was a challenge. I know that at least one of them has been very successful since then, so I don't feel as bad about taking the spot. But it was just another level of challenge. It was new, involved moving across the country, which was doable, and the challenge of building a clinical reasoning curriculum where all that had existed was a single course. So that was really interesting. I began by just reading the literature and then trying to design what I considered to be an ideal progression, sort of a spiral curriculum that would draw in classwork and other things that the students were learning at the same time as it helped them hone their reasoning process and push themselves to higher levels of analytical thinking. So
That
it was fun.
Yep. But you also
I want to go back to the PhD in chemistry education. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Chemical education.
Chemical education. And what year was this?
I started my PhD, oh my gosh, I knew you were going to, 1996.
Okay. That is remarkable to me because I have seen only recently postings at some universities for educators in some science departments, like that they're SOTL educators and like that's
Yes.
what they're there for. So yeah, what was that department like? Was it just like really progressive or foreseeing or?
I think we were really fortunate because my PhD mentor was truly groundbreaking. I don't know if you've ever heard of Loretta Jones, but she used to work at IBM. And this was when, and I know the technology is really dated, laser video discs were first coming out. And she had a conversation one day with Bill Gates. She was working at a nuclear lab somewhere. And somehow she met Bill Gates. And they started a conversation about how could they harness technology to enhance education. And that is where she started. And she was one of the first, I think her doctorate was in science education as well as chemistry. She started bringing it together and it was very progressive. This was just starting to get off the ground at that point. There were 5 programs at the time. I believe of those 5, only 2 still exist now, Purdue and UNC. And it just allowed us a lot of opportunities. So in addition to being housed in the Department of Chemistry and teaching chemistry labs and taking exams in biochemistry and all of that, We also had opportunities that were just amazing. Dr. Jones was working on developing software for teaching chemistry at the high school level. It was called ChemQuest, and she needed graduate assistants. You had to do two things. You had to know chemistry, some, at the high school level, and you had to be willing to learn how to code HTML, because this was the new thing way back. So I was able to participate in this nationally funded grant project from NSF to develop software. And she was also really intentional about exposing her students to the grant process itself.
Nice.
So when it was time to write a grant renewal, she brought us all into the process. She'd have us all read drafts. And it was just an incredible experience.
Amazing.
Well, and I will just pipe in here and say that the reason that she says we didn't actually physically cross paths, but I actually was raised in Greeley, Colorado. And so UNC was sort of my home university. So when people say UNC to me, I think Northern Colorado, not North Carolina. But what I want to point out is that UNC has two really, really well-known, nationally and internationally recognized programs. One of those is their teacher education and college of education program. The other is their music program. So just as an FYI, Regina is playing it down a little bit, but it's a nationally and internationally recognized high quality program. So it doesn't surprise me that they were that innovative.
It's amazing.
They really were, and it was just an incredible experience. Many of my graduate school peers have gone on to do things like run learning assistant programs in the sciences, chairing the community college departments. Only a few have done traditional things and gone on to be professors.
Yeah.
But it was interesting.
That's great.
That's cool. So what about your background, sort of growing up, family life, that sort of thing, led you to be interested in education?
I honestly couldn't tell you. I wanted to be a teacher from as far back as I remember. I always liked going to school, learning new things, having new experiences. I'd play school with my dolls all the time. I did. They were always pretty well behaved. So at one point, I contemplated becoming a helicopter pilot, decided that just wasn't my thing after a while. So the transmission of information and helping people see connections and helping people broaden their world is always what appealed to me.
Okay, that's the link. I was like, how do we get helicopter pilot and, educator? But then you said it right there, broadening your world, and that's the link.
Yeah.
I had never really thought about it that way, but it's always been interesting. I do like to see the big picture and then kind of hone in on specifics.
Yeah, sounds like
I love that you used to play school with
pilot.
I love that you used to play school with your dolls. That's amazing. I think that might be the first time I've ever heard anybody say that. I just think that's awesome.
Really?
Oh.
What did people do?
My siblings and I played school when we were kids.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
I didn't play with dolls because dolls creeped me out, but I
had enough siblings and cousins that we played, but we used Barbies and things like that sometimes too. If we didn't have enough students for class.
I didn't have any siblings.
Oh, you didn't? Yeah, no. We did play. I don't know why, in the summer, I don't know, but we were pretty nerdy too. So yeah, I always liked school as well, but we managed to we played school. In retrospect, it seems silly, but we did. I don't know.
And look at how we turned out.
That's right. Obviously,
about it.
It's not a problem.
Yeah, it's funny.
Definitely. So it's definitely been a very interesting ride, and changes keep on coming. Right now, I think the thing that I'm most excited about is starting to transition into a new role at North Carolina State. So finally, I made it through the promotion and tenure process, got promoted, got tenure. Thank you. Yes, that's been a very big accomplishment because it was what I was working towards since way back when in Colorado. And now North Carolina State is moving towards programmatic assessment, CBVE, etc. So I've taken on the new challenge of leading the CVM in programmatic assessment.
Nice. Wow. Not to mention the little editor position that you.
That's what I was like. Yeah, we're dancing around that. That's where I think a lot of folks are going to know your name.
That too. That was another case of just being open to opportunities. Way back when I was in Colorado, Sherry McConnell, at the time, I think she goes by Sherry Stewart now, had been on the editorial board for JVME. And she was feeling overworked and, people were busy. And she just asked me, she's like, hey, would you take my seat on the editorial board? You just have to go to a few meetings. We'll pay for you to go to DC. And I said, sure. And it was just the most fascinating meeting I'd ever attended,
Aw,
finding out how journals work from the other side.
nice.
Yeah. So I
Very
took
cool.
it and ran with it and just persisted. Then they were looking for an associate editor. I signed up, and then that gave me the insight, the experience, and the preparation to take over for Dow. So,
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And we hear
Definitely.
good things actually about the things you're doing there. So
Thank you.
personally, I appreciate the work that you're putting into it and some of the changes you're making. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. My goal, and I really hope anybody who listens, hopefully more than one person, is really to work on making publishing inclusive and accessible.
Yeah,
We need to get beyond our usual models for
agreed.
scholarship.
Agreed. Yeah, no, it's lovely. I think, yeah, having been on the other side, yeah, one thing I will say, I've really appreciated about, both submitting publications to JVME and then serving as a reviewer, the process, it is, I feel like, compared to other journals, that I've submitted to, the process is very clear. I love the rubric that there is now both as an author and a reviewer, I think is really helpful. To have that kind of transparency. And but the process always has felt, one, pretty darn efficient, which is saying something, but also it always has felt, even, the good, the bad, the feedback you get, it's always, I feel like, very balanced, and supportive. Even when there's criticisms, even when it's like, hey, we want you to make these changes, it's always through a lens of support, and that's just really lovely. So
Yeah,
Yes.
it is my very favorite place to submit things these days.
yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Agreed.
We try to achieve the tone that we are a community of educators and we need to work together.
Yep.
What have been your challenges in that role?
I would have to say my biggest challenge is finding reviewers.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Agreed.
Believe
That
it.
is, yeah, it's not news. It's something that all journal editors in the health professions are facing. I go to a meeting once a year, usually at Amy, and that is just a universal challenge. We're facing the fact that faculty are overworked. We all know that. And our current publication system and our current merit system doesn't really recognize the service involved in reviewing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I've been an associate editor on another publication, and that was, I mean, I had submissions that I literally sent out 15 or 20 invitations for
Yes.
reviews, and they sat in review for over a year because I literally could not find people to agree to review the paper. And it was so frustrating, and it was really helpful to me as an author to understand that side of it too. Because if you never had that
Absolutely.
experience, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes and how hard people are working. But it was just like, I be at my wit's end and I'm like, I don't know what else to do, and I
Yes.
feel bad, but so yeah, that's
Yes.
a universal, regardless. I think it's one of the difficult things about publishing.
Yes, that's definitely a commonality. Other things that I feel are specific to our journal is the need to find both people with credentials and background in education, as well as within specific veterinary content areas.
Yeah.
And given the status of our current faculty and current needs, finding reviewers in radiology and neurology is just so challenging, and I understand it.
Yeah,
Mm.
for sure.
So the question is, how is teaching your discipline different? Obviously, oriented at, how is internal medicine different from surgery, that kind of thing. So what would, first of all, what would you consider your discipline be? Is it kind of curricular reform or, yeah.
That's a really good question. If I wanted to answer within the context of veterinary medicine, I'd say clinical reasoning, because of all the years I've spent planning and pretty much administering the courses, designing them, and trying to get faculty to facilitate in them. And as far as what my true discipline is, I just want to say that it's veterinary educational enhancement. Pretty much taking the research skills that I built in my PhD in education and transferring them to the veterinary context. So whether that be looking at how we do admissions, looking at how we assess students, and something that particularly fascinates me is how do people become experts in their discipline?
Agreed.
Yes. Speaking
Yeah,
of which, we've had multiple conversations on our other committee, so that's
Yes,
not
absolutely.
surprising to me.
yeah. That was my lab that I did my master's in. That was their focus, was expertise, specifically sports, and they had a focus on golf pros. You know, how do you define a professional golfer, basically, or an expert golfer? Because professional is just you make money doing it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really, so when I was doing some of my research after I had graduated with some of my fellow PhD mates, we were having conversations because we were on all of us served as graduate assistants, research assistants on an NSF grant that our mentor had. And we were continuing some of that research afterwards. And one of the things we were talking about is we were actually talking about teacher reflection, because everybody talks about how great teacher reflection is. And we've had this conversation before, Eric, but nobody actually teaches teachers how to reflect, or, you know, what are the components of a reflection? What are the things you're supposed to be doing? Like, what are we looking for? We just say, hey, go reflect on this. And so we were having this conversation and sort of melded into this idea of how do you define certain things. And we came across, have you all heard about the Sorites paradox? SORITES. So it's essentially this idea of, at what point does a pile of sand become a sand dune, right? Like, how do you measure that in between point? And that's kind of what reminded me of that, is like, how do you determine when somebody moves from a novice to competent to, you know, able to teach others to expert? And then in that expert realm, how do you measure like somebody who is sort of at that lower level of expertise versus somebody who is like, you know, a maestro, like somebody who just knows how to take what they know and then push those boundaries even further? It's like, is it the difference between one grain of sand that turns, you know, a mound of sand into a hill, and it turns a hill into a dune? Or is it like 5,000 grains of sand? So it's a really interesting,
The answer.
yeah, right? Like, it's a really interesting thing, because it's,
I'm adding it as a topic for the future. Love it.
Nice.
We need to hear
No, it's
more
great. We
about
can talk
that.
about that. Yeah,
Love it.
forever.
Well,
Yeah.
I like so fascinated because like philosophically, like thinking about expertise, like I've made this comment before, you know, when I'm talking to students about like what is really our goal here in teaching students. And you know, nobody looks at a surgeon as like, oh yeah, that's an amazing surgeon. They can name all of the bones and all of the origin and insertion points of all their, no, it's they can problem solve in the moment in surgery. They can adapt, they can instruct. So like for me, you know, Regina, you're talking about like that clinical reasoning, those problem solving skills. That's like, it's one of those, we recognize it when we see it, right? Like that expertise is, I also like the definition of, you know, an expert as somebody who's made all of the mistakes in a very, very narrow field, right? But that's the same kind of thing. It's that problem solving, it's troubleshooting, it's learning all of, it's not just experiencing, but also like learning, okay, what happened? How do I avoid that? How do I do better next time? And then as Catherine was alluding to, all right, now how do I push these boundaries and how do I, you know, transfer this knowledge or apply this to a different situation? So for me, it really comes down to that problem solving, but that's so hard to capture and define as well, right?
I know. That's why I started a research project that is still a work in progress, because I got sidetracked by, you know, this little journal thing and other things. But what we have done is we created a series of standardized client and pet cases. So 3 different cases with a live animal and an actor. And we took, this is a qualitative study. We videotaped what we defined arbitrarily as 5 experts, 5 intermediates, and 5 novices. Mm-hmm. So we took board certified internal medicine clinicians. They're board certified. We consider them experts. Yeah. Then we took novices, which are 4th year veterinary students, because this is their very first time seeing cases. And for intermediates, we had to just go with house officers. That seemed to be the middle point. And what we did was we took GoPro cameras, mounted them on people's foreheads. And we also have the room mounted cameras. And we would run people through these cases. And then go back, and I built out a qualitative coding scheme with Kathy Lunn and April Kadrovich, and look at the different things different groups do. Yeah, and what we found, like one of the most shocking things to me was that the experts always made problem lists on paper.
Oh, fascinating.
The novices didn't do it as frequently.
Oh, that's fascinating.
That's interesting.
That is such a cool I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
really
I
interesting.
like it because that's something that when I was trying to do, and I'm still working on, is developing a measuring scale. Like I would love to have something like Piaget's stages of development,
Mm,
so we can figure out where students are and where they need to go. But in the interim, it's very easy to tell a student, look, I've done this research. One thing you can do right now that's going to help you in the future is take a piece of paper and a writing instrument or a tablet and
Yeah,
make a
whatever.
problem list.
That's
Yeah.
so funny. Literally yesterday morning,
Uh-huh.
I'm on clinics and we have this case and it's kind of weird, right? Like it's a weird case. And so I say to the students, I'm like, okay, so this is kind of a weird case. So what do we do? And they're like, I was like, we go back to the basics.
Yeah.
I go over to the dry erase board and I go, we're going to write down a problem list because that's what we do. That's what I
Yeah.
do when I'm like, this is, if it's straightforward, it's the classic case, we do that, we do it in our heads, right? But we skip. I'm like, but we can't do that, we can't skip this step, we have to go back and do the process, and we're going to make our problem list, and then we're going to make our differentials. So it's funny that you said that, because I'm like, oh yeah, I totally do that. Yeah, it's interesting that that's a common thing to see.
And it seems like now that you say it, it seems like, oh gosh, it should be obvious, because if you think about, so some of the things that I've done in the, reading in the medical literature is, one of the ways, obviously, you can decrease the mistakes that are made is to have checklists, right? You have something physically there that you follow a list, and it's a written thing that you have to check. And then also making this connection to students who, I've had multiple conversations with students who are struggling, and I ask them, what are you doing to study? How are you studying these things? And they're like, oh, well, I do this or I do that. And one of the things that I ask them is, do you type your notes or do you handwrite your notes? And they're like, most of them type it, right? And I'm like, well, I'm going to encourage you to go back to handwriting your notes. And these are the reasons why, right? Because you have to cognitively sort of sift through things, figure out how you're going to put it together in a way that makes sense later, but you're picking out the things that are important. That's not something you're going to do when you're typing, if you're able to type fast enough to keep up with. So there's something about that. And I know that for me too, right? When I'm really trying to learn something, I have to write it down. During vet school, it was so frustrating because I had people who would just sit there and listen and they would catch it. And I'm like, I have to write it down or it's not going to go into my brain. So there's something about that physical act. So it grounds us, or it just connects to some kind of, I don't know, something in our brains. But so yeah, now I'm like, oh, it makes sense. But it's very interesting that you found that, because
Absolutely. And to me, I also feel like there's another explanation: cognitive load.
Yep.
yeah.
Once you've written down the problems, you free up your brain for other things.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's what I was thinking when Catherine talked about checklists. I'm like, yep, then I don't have to think about that. I can dedicate brain space to something else that's more challenging.
Yeah,
Yep, absolutely.
for sure.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about, because I don't do that, and I've never seen a surgeon or anesthesiologist do that in the OR, like ahead of time, or in the, like when there's in the ICU, whatever. And I'm like, what would that look like for us on a practical level? Like you're in the middle of this kind of time sensitive case. How do we accomplish a similar thing cognitively, without necessarily writing it down? And I don't know if I have a very good answer to that.
Yeah, but you do teach.
Things.
I mean, you teach, like, I would assume, because that's what we do here with our students. I mean, they have lots of time to go through their anesthesia protocols ahead of time, right? They sit down, they calculate, they think about it, they have conversations about it, and then it gets checked, and then they're told, well, there's some things that you need to fix. Go think about this. So there's like, you're still writing it down before you.
That's true. Yeah, they're coming up with a problem list in the planning phase.
Yes, they're doing it ahead of time,
Also,
thinking about comorbidities and
but even in the moment, right, Eric, like you've got the anesthesia record, and usually there's little boxes that's like, okay, here's your emergency. So there's definitely some offloading that's going on there, but that's also priming you, right? So you're like thinking like, I should think about these things. Is it fluid therapy? Is it that, like, so there's also some of that that's kind of built in, I think. Probably not so much for the surgeons. Have a sterile tablet that they can like jot down, but I think for anesthesia, like to some degree, you're probably doing that. I don't know.
Although I'm wondering if this is why we see more errors in anesthesia, and why anesthesia like has always led the way in error management, is because we do it all internally, and maybe that's bad.
Maybe. Yeah,
that's interesting.
I mean, there's a lot of math associated.
Research study.
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously. I
Yeah,
hope
what if you started writing things down and like see what would happen to the error rates?
Yeah.
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 I love this idea of the cognitive load and the problem solving, because I think that I had a tech, she was actually a veterinary assistant who said to me one day, she's like, you know, Dr. Fogelberg, I've watched so many spays. I'm pretty sure I could do one myself. And I just looked at her and I said, no, Brandy, that's no. And she's like, no, I mean, I've seen so many of them. And it's like, well, so first of all, there's a possibility that you could do the surgery. I said, but the skill of the surgery is not the actual surgery. It's what might go wrong and how you manage that if it does. And I said to her, so granted, if, and I'm not willing to admit this, but if you could manipulate the instruments the way that you think you can, and you can handle tissue the way that you think you can, and you can actually do all of the things physically in the body cavity that you think you can you manage it when the dog arrests on the table, or the dog starts to wake up, or you accidentally cut something that you're not supposed to cut? And she just kind of looked at me and she was like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. Right. And that's what you go to vet school for. You don't go to vet school to learn those things. You learn those things so that you know how to manage the other things that happen when they happen in the moment. And that's what it's all about, right? Is the problem solving. Like, what do you do? I had a vet that I was working with who'd been in our clinic for quite some time. And I think I've told the story to both of you before, but he had an open abdomen on the table in a surgery, and the dog started to wake up, and he literally dropped his instrument, stepped back from the table, and put his hands in the air. Had no idea what to do. I mean, this is a licensed veterinarian. And I hear, Dr. Fogelberg, Dr. Fogelberg. And like, I go running into the surgery seat, and the tech's like, what do I do? And I'm like, what's going on? And literally this doctor is standing there like this in the surgery suite with an open abdomen and a dog waking up on the table. And I'm like, what's going on? Well, the dog's waking up and he doesn't know what to do. What do I do? What do I do? I'm like, propofol. Let's get some propofol into the dog. And she's like, okay. So she calms down. She gets propofol into the dog, gets the dog asleep. And then I'm like, let's check the tube, right? Obviously something's going on. So the next step is to check the tube. So she pulls the tube out, reintubates the dog, inflates the cuff, does all that stuff. And literally the other doctor standing there the whole time. And I'm like, how did you get through vet school? Right? Like,
you know, those are tough situations. And when you have to prepare for it, and I think that's the for me, the most recent thing I can really think of, were like learning something new and challenging after like my first, I guess my second faculty position. I had to learn how to do hemodialysis. That was not something I'd ever learned before. And, you know, the first many cases, I had other people around and like nothing went wrong. And I was like, okay, like this is actually pretty easy. You just kind of hook them up and you set the parameter and blah, blah. And then you have the first complication. Then it's like, oh, okay.
yeah.
All right, now I understand, you know, why this is so tight. But so when everything's routine, when everything's going fine, and spays, people have this idea in their head that like a spay is that's a major surgery, you know, and a lot of things can go wrong. And we had a scenario at Virginia Tech recently during a spay lab where there was a complication. Somebody nixed the spleen, and you know, the dog ended up having to get a transfusion. It all went well, and I'm thinking that was such, like, I'm sad that it happened for the dog, but like, since it happened, what a great experience for those students, because they had doctors there that were able to step in and say, this is what we do. This is how we handle this. And they were probably terrified in the time, but hopefully with some reflection and some time to go through that, like that's going to be so much more powerful than going through and everything's perfect the whole time through. I think even the groups who were not involved when I think will still have some ripple effect. That's so important, because as much as we work to make sure those things don't happen, we learn so much from failure, right? We learn so much from our mistakes, and mistake avoidance and failure avoidance is actually like really detrimental to learning. So I think it's not surprising that you have somebody who's in that situation. They're like, I've spent all my time avoiding these situations, and it doesn't prepare us for when it happens.
Yeah.
So Regina, how do we teach those decision-making skills that you're talking about without creating a crisis for every student?
I haven't been able to accomplish this, but what I really wanted to do was have simulated cases, scenarios, actually. So I had tried to at some point get some of the mannequins and the simulators that Dan Fletcher's using at Cornell and possibly pair them with the standardized clients from communication
Mhm.
so that to make it more real,
Mhm.
because there's no substitute for experience and adrenaline.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm actually curious. I'm gonna pivot a little bit if that's okay. I'm actually curious because you talk about clinical reasoning, which I I know enough about chemistry to know that I don't like chemistry. But I don't know enough about it in terms of how it might or might not parallel with clinical reasoning. And the reason I ask this is because we have several educators who are phenomenal educators that are not veterinarians. And I know, and often, and unfortunately, many of them experience some prejudice from the people that they work with because there's an assumption that, well, you're not a veterinarian, you can't possibly understand. And so I'm curious, number one, if you've experienced that and how you've navigated that. And number two, how you've drawn on your education as a sort of primarily a chemistry educator to navigate that too.
I think that's a great question. So for number one, sadly, I have experienced it and I continue to experience it. It was much worse at the beginning of my career when I wasn't as familiar with veterinary terminology. Since one of my roles was to observe teaching, I sat through just about every lecture that a vet student had in their 4 years of
Gosh.
school. So
An honorary degree.
Yeah, no
yes.
kidding.
Well, you were talking about the tech who said she could do surgery. I sometimes joke that if people would let me sit for the NAVLE, I could probably pass the knowledge portion.
Probably, actually,
Just
probably.
based on recall. So what has helped me is that as I've grown, I've been able to give people more focused examples. So I've been able to say, when you are doing, depending on the audience, if it's orthopedists, a TPLO,
Mhm.
something might go wrong. And then just trying to say, how are you going to troubleshoot that?
Mhm.
So that has really helped. And also over time, the profession has become much more welcoming.
Yeah, good.
I think the India Lanes and Lizette Hardys have really laid good groundwork for us. And I'm pleased to see that getting better over time.
Yeah.
As far as, thanks, yeah. And as far as the parallels, a lot of chemistry for me was troubleshooting failed experiments.
That's fair.
I mean, that I do not have what we used to call lab hands. There are some people who can walk in, set up an experiment, and have it go perfectly.
Yeah.
I remember my first vitamin C titration, my lab partner and I both ended up wearing pink Hawaiian punch.
Oh, no.
Oh yeah, we didn't have the suction cup set up properly and the hose wasn't connected. It just went everywhere. Yes. So much like you were talking about, the doctor just went, oh my God. My lab mate and I took a moment to go, wah! And then said, okay, let's regroup. We have 2.5 hours left in lab. Why did this thing not get sucked through the funnel? Do we have a gap in our vacuum system? What is not connected? And that is pretty much the same thing that you would do in your case when the anesthesia machine wasn't working or in anything else.
Yeah.
Or if you made the wrong assumption and your hypothesis wasn't correct, why didn't it go as planned? Same as diagnosing a patient.
That's great. I find it really fascinating and endlessly interesting still that there are veterinarians who don't have a background in education that somehow think that as an educator, you can't teach them something because you don't speak veterinary language, yet they seem to think that they don't speak education language and therefore that they can still do everything within education and shouldn't have to listen to somebody who speaks that language, right? Like it's a very strange, I see smirks because I know you guys know this is right? Like it's just
Oh,
like,
100%.
it's
I
just
can't,
very, it's a strange,
I
don't
can't
know.
tell you how
Why
many
would you
times
dissonance?
I've heard veterinarians, specifically, I mean, and other things, but specifically with regard to education. Yeah, but veterinary medicine is so different. It's so unique. You don't understand. Like, even when comparing to human medicine, they're like, it's just so different. I'm like, is it? I mean, like, there are features that are different, but like, also people can imagine, like, like
Yeah.
people have experienced some of the, like, it's not, I guess we're just, I mean, and that's fine. People want to feel like, we're very unique and in some ways we are, but in a lot of ways that attitude closes us off from a lot of opportunities and a lot of, knowledge that really we could extrapolate and we could apply. And so I have to laugh at that because I hear it all the time.
Well, and I mean, I do think that there are some very unique things about veterinary education, veterinary medicine, but it's not from an educational perspective, right? I mean, like, there are some challenges that we have that other things don't have. And so maybe some ways that we need to think about it a little bit differently than
Sure.
say human medicine or, physical therapy.
Yeah.
But the education language is still the same, but people
Also,
want to
yeah,
poo-poo it all the time. It's like,
yeah,
Yeah,
how can you take me seriously if I don't,
yeah.
talk your language, but you don't take me seriously when you don't speak my language? It's
Well,
just,
and yeah, the idea that it's so unique and that it's no possible way for someone else to understand unless you've been through it.
Right.
Like, how about I just explain to you what's different? And then you go, oh, okay, now I understand. And
right.
apply this knowledge. Like, it's not so unique and so complex that somebody who hasn't been through it couldn't possibly
Right.
imagine what's happening. Like, no, we just
Right.
talk about what those things are and it'll be okay.
I mean, so much of it is, at least when I go to medical conferences, they put veterinarians in with pediatricians and it fits so well.
Oh my gosh, so
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And we focus on the fact that it's mediated communication where your patient can't speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And that's something that we can all relate to.
Absolutely.
And animals bleed just like people. So
Yeah, but it's different, Regina.
It is
I
different.
know,
It's
but I
very
think
different.
I've heard that most from people who are afraid of change.
Yeah.
From people who want to replicate how they themselves were trained.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's very fair. I remember back to even when I was a senior in vet school, my clinical year, and there was just this big brouhaha because administration is trying to tell us clinicians that we have to use a rubric to evaluate students. I know what a good student is, and I know what a bad student is, and I can tell that in the first 5 hours I work. It's like, no, you can't. Like, no, that's not how it works, people.
That's propagating the same. I can tell a good student in 5 minutes because they are just like me.
That's exactly. So, or I have 30 years of experience and I know what to look for. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm not going to tell you don't know what to look for, but I am going to tell you there's a lot of other things that you're probably missing because you're so focused on these things. So anyway, it's just an ongoing conversation. So I'm glad to hear that you feel like it's getting better. I'm sorry that you've experienced that same prejudice from other people. I've experienced it as well, but probably not at the same level because I at least have that veterinary degree. So I get a little bit of grace, but when I start speaking in, education stuff, it's just like the blank, face comes on and they're like, I don't know what she's talking about. And I'm not going to admit it, but I'm just going to tell her that it doesn't matter.
There is a bit of that, but there also is the talk to the people who are listening to you.
Yeah.
Start with those folks and eventually it'll disseminate.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
Yeah, that's nice. What have been some of your favorite education successes?
That's a really good question. I think one of my favorite things is off the ball in terms of it doesn't really fit in with the other things that I've done, but I developed some Spanish for veterinarians courses. And that allowed me to bring in my personal background along with communication that I've observed. And going through these trainings, I trained a bunch of folks in Denver and then seeing that they were able to go out to their local clinics. These were technicians in practice and we had a 6-week course and they'd come back and share, well, I was able to help this dog get flea protection because I explained it to their family.
Nice.
Yes. And that was very special to me because we made a difference for that one case.
Yeah. Well,
that you heard about. Yeah.
I was gonna say you made a difference for a lot of cases, but you
Yep.
just heard about one or two. So.
Yeah, the feedback was special and just being able to combine helping humans and helping animals at the same time.
That's fantastic.
And yeah, thanks. That also led to me going on some spay-neuter trips to Mexico. I was the official receptionist.
Ah.
That was amazing. I gathered data for some human-animal bond projects, but it was also really interesting to be able to interact with pet owners in the country I had grown up in, but like 20 years later, and seeing changes over time. So that was pretty cool. And I think between the early 2000s and now, there's been even more change in that realm. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very fun.
Do you still do that course and do you do it online? Because I would be really interested in making it.
It was discontinued when I moved to North Carolina. Colorado State might still offer it online for continuing education.
Okay.
When I came to NC State, there was somebody who was already doing Spanish for veterinarians as a credit course. So
okay.
We have one at Virginia Tech, Catherine. We have
I know, we do. I don't
think it's offered online though.
Yeah.
okay,
And I know
is it? if I might ask.
Roger Ramirez Barrios teaches it, and then he's got several other,
There's several people
I think,
teaching.
native Spanish speakers who
Yep.
are helping
I
out.
think
But
maybe all of them are native Spanish speakers. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like at least 5 or 6 faculty who teach at different points in it.
yeah, Texas A&M has one too. I just don't know if it's online. It's been going for a while, but I just need to sit down. I have several friends who are Mexican and speak fluent Spanish, and they're always giving me a hard time because you need to learn Spanish. I'm like, I know, I need to do a lot of things. So now that I'm moving back to Texas, maybe I'll sit down. I'm also trying to learn Swahili, so you know.
That is interesting. What made you decide to learn Swahili?
I have a nonprofit that functions in Kenya, and the 2 national languages of Kenya are English and Swahili. So it'd be nice to, plus, frankly, I spend enough time there that I would like to know when people are talking about me. I mean, let's be honest.
I mean, that's just a really cool area of development. Like,
Yeah.
Great.
So.
very nice.
So, Regina, you've done a lot of research in the past. Is there any project in the past that you were like, oh, this was very cool and I would like to do more of this? Or is there anything in the future that you're looking forward to doing research-wise?
So in the past, I think my human animal bond studies with Hispanic culture were very interesting. They had some effects. In terms of the future, I still really, really want to analyze my expert novice observation data. But as I've been learning more about data analytics and learning analytics and all of that, I'm starting to look at machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I'm wondering if there is some way to build algorithms such that a machine can analyze because the transcripts of these interactions. We have both the interaction and then the reflection on the interaction. So I'm wondering about having a computer analyze it to help us find themes that would potentially be less subject to human bias.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So 2 things on that. One is related and one is not. One is a question. What do you think AI, or how do you think AI might impact the clinical reasoning capacity of students? Because I think there's going to be this temptation to just feed it into AI and have AI do the thinking instead of them doing the thinking. So I'm curious about that. And then the other thing is just a comment. I don't know if you all saw this or not, but there are these 2 freshmen at MIT who created gloves that when you sign with these gloves on, the gloves then interpret that into spoken language.
That's cool.
So if you're a part of the deaf community and you speak ASL and you're signing or your finger spelling, it will actually interpret that spoken so that, like, if you're out in the community and you speak sign but nobody else does, people can still hear what you're saying. So
that is cool.
Really cool. I think they won like that $1 million inventor award or whatever this year. So anyway, it's on along the lines of AI and sort of that technology. But I was wondering, what you think about
That's a really good question. So I've experimented with it a little bit with my first year students. So we talked about it, and in the first year clinical reason class, one of the things they do is write a SOAP. So I was a little bit evil. I made them get up as far as their problem list, and I said, okay, here's your challenge. Take this problem list, go open up AI and tell it to generate a SOAP. Just do it. See what you get, bring that to class. And then we're going to put these up on the walls and we're going to critique them against the rubric that I've given you for writing a SOAP. So take a look at what the AI is doing well and where it falls short for you. And I think that was eye-opening to them to see that there's mistakes.
Yeah.
And AI doesn't know it all. But this way it was less threatening to them. It's like, you're going to tell the AI what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was powerful. After that, I had about half the class who said, can we use AI always in our SOAPs? And I had half the class who said, I never want to do this again.
Interesting.
Yeah. There were some who were just like, ooh.
I added an assignment for my course this term where using AI, and for this one, I'm having them use AI to generate, like, for client communication, like come up with a challenging scenario and put your queries into an AI. And I have them do like 3 different queries on the same thing so they can play around with, like, what you give the AI, can affect what you get back. And then they have to, choose the best one and give me that transcript and then critique it. And then tell me, can you see yourself using this to kind of help guide your client communication in the future? Because the same thing, like, it's a tool. where is it making mistakes? Where is it helpful? And I love that. But I'm also really fascinated by, you had mentioned potentially using AI to reduce the bias in assessing, these transcripts. And I guess one of the things, and I'm far from an AI expert, but one of the things I think we're starting to understand is that the AI is learning from what we already have given it, and so much of that is already biased. So I guess that's my concern. It'll be interesting to see, can the AI actually reduce the bias, or is it actually just going to amplify the biases that have been fed to it already?
Absolutely. So to your point, you're thinking about generative AI, like your chat GPT, et cetera, which is trained on the existing internet stuff.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking about doing is a machine learning model.
Gotcha.
Where we train it on a subset of our transcripts and we show it what an example of a hypothesis is. We show it what an example of a differential is. And then we turn it loose to do this reliably on the other 80% of the transcripts, because it doesn't get tired,
Got it. No, so you limit the parameters for what it's going to use in its assessment. I see.
Yes.
Yeah, makes
It
sense.
would be more of a closed circuit, and then also seeing what associations it finds. If we feed it a set of transcripts that are labeled novice and a set of transcripts that are labeled expert, we say, find commonalities in this set and this set, and then tell us how they're different.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be interesting. Yeah.
So that's what I'm really hoping to get to.
Very cool.
Love it.
Yeah, that would be really nice for qualitative data analysis efficiency.
Absolutely. Then the question is, how many iterations and how many models do we need to achieve inter-rater reliability?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think so as a qualitative researcher myself, I can see the value in that, but I also, there's something in me that's like, this is probably the old school part of me, but like there's a reason that I like to listen to the recordings and review them, because I'm a discourse analyst, right? And so if you're talking about big D discourse, I'm talking about all of the things that go into those communicative acts. And that includes the size and the inflections and the pauses. And so if somebody says thanks versus thanks, right? Like, is that something that a machine can pick up, or is that something that you really do need the intuitive understanding of sociocultural cues for, and like that a human can bring? So it'll, at some point, I'm sure it will get there. I don't know if we're there yet, but I'm curious about that, because I think for just sort of the finding themes and things like that, that's probably really helpful. But if you're really doing a true discourse analysis, it might not be as helpful.
Finding meaning might be a little harder.
Yeah.
Right. I agree with you 120%. There's no doubt about it. But I am at the level of looking at spoken words, or in our case, transcripts, and just like, so did they say liver disease? Did they consider kidney disease?
Gotcha.
So
yeah.
I think it'll just help, because the volume of data we've generated is just too much for humans to really be able to analyze effectively.
Yeah. I was just on a grant review. It was a sort of a pre-proposal grant review for some medical education research. And it happened to be a qualitative research, and they want to do 31-hour-long interviews with these participants. And so I'm doing, right, exactly. So I'm doing the review with this group, and it was actually a pretty good and very interesting proposal. But the people that were on that committee didn't really have a whole lot of qualitative experience. And so they're like, I'm really worried about the number. It doesn't seem like enough. And I'm like, oh, no. It's actually probably too many. And they're like, what? I'm like, I don't think they understand the volume of material they're going to get in 30. And I think they had asked for like $1,000 to do transcriptions. And I'm like, well, if you're going to do manual transcriptions of that it's going to be way more money. Right. Like,
But the volume. Like 5 or 6, maybe.
Right. Yeah. And so when you say that, like, I think people who are quantitative researchers sometimes, and have never had experience with qualitative, they don't understand the volume of material and data that comes from.
Well, and how much data is generated by one 1-hour interview?
Right, right.
That's not one data point.
No. Yeah. I mean, it's
amazing.
So that's
like, don't you kind of just want to fund it just to show that, be like, yep, go for it?
Well, so we actually, it was actually pretty well done. And we did recommend that they be invited to do a full proposal. And they were in fact invited to do that. And we were able to give them some of that feedback, but it was just interesting because the committee members just were flabbergasted. You know, they're
Can't
like, wait,
do
what do you
this
mean
with
30 is too many? I'm like, no, I promise you that 30 is more than they need. So
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, Regina, as we're kind of coming to the end of our time, any takeaways that you would have for the listeners, for the audience, things that you think that would be helpful for them in their careers?
I would say find something you're interested in and learn a lot about it. That would probably be the best advice, because when you're interested in something, you're going to find yourself doing a literature search just because you want to know how this works.
yeah.
And then you're going to try and tweak things and you're going to hypothesize because you want to know what's happening. So I think that would be the key to any successful research. And in terms of teaching, just teach what you enjoy.
Yeah.
And have fun.
And I just want to reiterate, congratulations on achieving tenure and promotion based on educational research. We just don't hear that enough, and it needs to happen more often. So bravo and congratulations, because that's a huge accomplishment.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. This has been a lot of fun.
Yes, thanks. I love having
you.
guests on the show. It's so interesting to hear people's stories, and thanks for all that you've been doing for veterinary education and continue to do. It's been lovely to have you on the show, and yeah, just great to chat with you.
Great. Thank you.
Good choice, Eric.